Joining me in our session, Automating and Improving Business Processes When You Move to Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, is Kaylee Acuna, who is a solution specialist in our Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation practice. Thank you for joining us today, Kaylee. I'll pass it over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Melissa. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my lessons learned, experiences, and tips and tricks for our topic today. So as Melissa mentioned, my topic today is automating and improving business processes when you move to Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. The agenda for today, I'm just going to do a quick introduction about myself and some reasons why your process might need to change. I'm going to review specific signs that a process is ready for improvement or automation. I'm going to talk about the differences between those two concepts so that they're really clear when we go through our specific business examples. And then I'm just going to end with a few closing comments. And then I will hand it back to Melissa. Okay, just a little bit about myself. So the reason I'm qualified to talk about this topic today is because I've actually been on the other side of an implementation pretty recently, actually. I was the primary subject matter expert for our company when we moved from our previous ERP system into Dynamics. And I was responsible for learning the new system as well as training our end users on how to use the new system. But part of that process was also learning where we could make changes and improvements along the way to better smooth out that process. So it took a lot of work and a lot of learning, but through that process, I learned how, and it put me in a unique position to be able to identify areas for improvement and implement them where it made sense. In this session, I'm going to share some of those tips and tricks I've learned for recognizing when the process can be automated or improved. As I said, I've been through this. I've been on the user side, the end user side. I know how hard it can be. And so hopefully the topics that we cover in our session today will help guide you in this process, because it's a big one. Moving to a new ERP system is a big deal. Okay. Before we get started, an important distinction I'd like to call out is the difference between change versus automation, change or improvement versus automation. These two things often get roped together into one concept, which makes sense because one usually happens with the other, one happens instead of the other. They always tend to come up in the same conversations, but they are very different. And for this session today, knowing the differences is going to be important for recognizing those signs for change and improvement. So the first thing is change. Not everything can be automated in a business. If it could, we wouldn't have any, people, any employees actually working at the business anymore. So that's obviously not possible. But you still have employees who are going to need to think critically and make decisions about how to handle things. So recognizing when a small change can result in a big improvement for process is really key in being successful in implementing a new ERP system. So that's a biggie. Often simple changes can be the most effective for improving someone's process, and there's no better time to examine those than when moving to a new system. Automation. Through the process of migrating to a new system, there's often areas that are sort of ripe for automation. Usually when something is done really manually or takes a lot of time for someone to do, nothing really highlights that more than changing systems. And it's important to call out too that automation doesn't necessarily mean there's no human involvement anymore, right? There's various levels of automation. Automation can be, taking a task or a set of tasks that's done completely by a person today and removing them from the process entirely, so it being 100% automated. There's also various levels of that. So when someone maybe has to manually review something, but then there's an automated process that takes over so that they don't have to complete that task or that set of tasks manually. And migrating to a new system is really a great opportunity to examine opportunities where that can help and where it can free up someone's time to do things that are more value add for the company and for the business. Okay, we're going to dive right in here with signs your process should change. So as I mentioned in the last slide, change versus automation, these signs are going to have some crossover. So if you imagine like a Venn diagram between change and automation, there is a crossover spot. And sometimes, as I mentioned, a combination of both improvement, change, and automation might be exactly what your business needs when you're moving to a new ERP system. So some key signs that your process should change. The first one, and this is an old one and it's common across many companies, is tribal knowledge. Tribal knowledge is when one specific employee uh, who's maybe been at the company for a really long time knows exactly how something should be done. They know exactly how it should be done, and they've been doing it for so long that no one really questions it, and no one else really knows how to do it. The problem with this is, of course, when that person is maybe out of the office or they're sick or something, then that work simply doesn't get done. And when you even get to a point where other employees have an aversion to taking action in a process without first talking with that employee, that's a sure sign that that process should change. The next one is manual work. This is a really key one, and as I mentioned earlier, not all manual work is going to go away. That's why we have jobs, right? But manual work tends to be super time consuming. It tends to be error prone, especially if it's more on the data entry side of things. Manual work, uh, especially when someone is doing it as a prerequisite for them to actually do their job, that's a really clear sign that the process needs to change. Using Excel, I love Excel. I'm just going to start by saying that. I use it all the time. It's a great tool. There's really nothing else like it. However, when Excel becomes the primary location for which important information is being stored, that's when you've got a problem or a potential problem, right? That's a great sign that it's time to change something. You can run into issues like versioning. Everyone has dealt with this before when you have different versions of the same Excel spreadsheet running around out there. That can be an issue, especially if that Excel spreadsheet is holding really important or critical information for the business. So using Excel, the overuse of Excel to store important information is a sure sign that your process should change. And the last one I have listed here is change or upgrade is extremely difficult. And this you see a lot with legacy processes, and this sort of dovetails into the tribal knowledge portion of the signs. And it's when you've got user adoption issues. So when your employees simply refuse to use the new tools because either they don't want to or it's too difficult, that's when that's a really clear sign that your process needs to change. Either the process is too difficult and the thought of doing it any other way is so prohibitive that they just refuse, or there's just no interest in changing it. So that's usually a sign that it's time for a change in the process. Okay, this next slide is talking about signs that your process is ready for automation. And if you recall, I mentioned that automation and change, think of it like a Venn diagram, right? There's overlap. So some of these are the same as what we saw on the last slide, but the need for automation versus change is different, and that can be made clear by some of these signs. So again, manual work, you saw this on the last slide, it's time consuming, it's error prone. Depending on the type of manual work, and we'll get into this in a later slide with specific business examples, depending on the manual work, it really is a sign that your process could be automated, especially if someone's doing the same thing every day and they're getting it with the same set of variables, meaning it's coming from the same source, or they're getting, consistent information from somewhere. That's a really easy indicator that automation would really elevate that process. Data entry. Data entry is also an easy sign that something's ready for automation. The source of the information is consistent, and employees have to move from one place to another in order to just begin their day. Repetition is really the indicator for data entry that could be automated versus something that needs to just change, right? If your employee doesn't have to make any critical decisions or, use that information to then move forward depending on one factor or another, if it's just the same thing every day, that process is ready for automation. Another sign is emails being used too often. So emails used to communicate between employees using the same system, emails used as a database to find and store historical information. Email is super useful, we all use it, but when it's being used to store critical information, and it sort of is taking the place of essentially a CRM system to find, interactions between customers or interactions between employees and customers, it's a sign that automation would be really beneficial. And that's because email can be integrated with so many systems, including F&O, that automation here would really elevate the process and would make it more secure. Email isn't a place we want to long-term store information that we might need to reference, or if it has important information that needs to be protected, like credit card information or something of the like. The last one I have listed here is data-based non-standard business processes. And what I mean by this is custom SQL queries or integrations that routinely require a developer to intervene. This is a great sign that automation would be beneficial. When there's custom integrations involved that maybe only one person wrote or knows how to maintain, it often can create a bottleneck with maintenance and improvements. And so this is a really clear sign that automation in a standardized manner is going to be an improvement, especially when moving to a new system. There's really no better time to analyze and implement these changes than when you're moving from one system to another. All right, so now we're going to get into some specific business examples. These are going to be examples that speak directly to the signs that we just covered. So I'm going to use really specific examples that you would see in an everyday business to demonstrate some of the signs that I mentioned. So this first one I've got listed as tribal knowledge. This one showed up on both the signs for that your process is ready for change and signs that your process is ready for automation, because tribal knowledge touches all processes and we all have familiarity with this. So a good example is warehousing. So if you have a warehouse or a distribution center and you've got orders that are being released to that warehouse, you may have some senior person down in the distribution center who just knows that there's this one customer who likes their orders released a certain way, combined in a certain way, and shipped in a certain way. If they just know that and they take care of it and it goes well, that's great. But if they're ever out sick or they're unavailable or you move to a new system, that tribal knowledge is really hard to capture if it's not written down anywhere. So pick release consolidation is a great example of where automation or change would really benefit the company, because anybody who could come into that role could then execute whatever process that person historically knows. And it's important to mention too that, just as a side note, that tribal knowledge is super valuable. And I'm not saying that it needs to go away. And on the contrary, is usually sort of the heart of whatever process there is. But capturing it in a way that it can be shared amongst other people is really the key. The other example I have of tribal knowledge is manufacturing. It's similar to the warehousing example in that there may be some person who's been, on the production floor for a really long time, and they know exactly in which order to produce these work orders, right? I know that I want this set of items made first, this set of items made next, this set of items made last, because, maybe no one likes those items or something like that. So they just know that inherently. That's a great example where that tribal knowledge can be easily translated into an automated process by assigning a priority level to items systemically, so that any person could step into that role and execute that same tribal knowledge, at any point, which wouldn't disrupt the business at all. The next example I have here is manual work. Again, this crosses over with change versus automation because levels of both really will come into play here. Accounts receivable is a great place where automation can be beneficial. There's a lot of data entry that can be involved. Customer statements and invoicing is a great example of this. You've got regular invoicing of customers, you're sending them monthly statements. If you have someone doing this manually every month, it's a great opportunity for automation because there's a standard cadence for which this is happening. There's a consistent amount of, or consistent source of data for what information is being sent. There's no need for someone to go in and manually do that every month. Another example again is accounts receivable, credit card processing, and collections. So these have standard variables that are easily incorporated into a process that is automated or semi-automated. So credit card processing, what I mean by that is when someone pays for something with their credit card, you don't want someone to have to go in and manually create a receipt for that. There's no need for it. There's ways that we can implement standard credit card processing in an automated sense so that the information the user already has to input is being incorporated in the system. Inventory, this is another place where automation or change would be really beneficial. Purchase order receiving, this is a really common one that I've seen when you've got a warehouse or a distribution center who receives large volumes of inventory at a time. Maybe it's a whole shipping container or two in a week. Instead of manually looking up which, purchase order or which vendor that product is coming from, there are ways to automate, an inbound process so that your warehouse person knows exactly what's coming, they know when it's coming, they know when it's scheduled to arrive. Um, there's no need for that stuff to be done manually. Those are known factors. Okay, the next one I have here is Excel. Again, I love Excel. I use Excel all the time, but it should not be used for storing important information. A great example is demand planning and forecasting. Demand planning, I've seen this quite a bit because Excel is so user friendly. Demand planning and forecasting, meaning how much product does your company need to have in a given period of time in order to do their business. So let's say you sell t-shirts and you know you need to sell 5,000 t-shirts this year. Your planner might have an Excel spreadsheet that tells them they need to order 1,000 t-shirts every 2 months in order to maintain that number. There's no need for that to live in Excel. You run into those issues we talked about before where you've got versioning problems. If it crashes and you lose important information, there's no real way to get it back, right? So that's a great example of where a process that inherently maybe lives in Excel can be put into the new system. General ledger is another place where I see Excel being overused. Generating financial documents, again, it's a great tool for analyzing financial data and maybe turning them into summaries to be sent to other people in the company, but it should not store the base information for your financial documents. That's really a big red flag in terms of ERP systems. Another one for Excel is sales order confirmations. This is a really common one. When you order something and you receive that email that says, we got your order, and it has a summary of what it is that you ordered. If you're using Excel or if your employees are using Excel to generate a confirmation that then gets manually emailed to the customer to confirm that that's what they've ordered, that's a really easy place for automation to save quite a bit of time, because if they're placing an order with your company, you already know that information. So being able to sort of send back an acknowledgement of that order, there's no need for Excel to be involved in that. Okay, the last one I have here is data entry. Data entry is really common, especially when you have, depending on what ERP system you're coming from and how old it is. A great example of this is lockbox processing. And lockbox processing is specifically when you're receiving checks from your customers. They get deposited at a bank, and the bank sends you a daily file of, the payments that were received. That has to be incorporated in your system somehow. So the manual version of that is to take all of those receipts that were deposited in your bank account and manually create corresponding transactions for them in your ERP system. Again, there's no need for that to be done manually. That's the kind of thing that would take someone quite a bit of time to do. And then once they have that information in their ERP system, they can then start their job, which is reconciling payments against outstanding balances. And so by freeing up their time from doing that data entry, they have a lot more availability to review and reconcile, payments, which is what they should be spending their time on anyway. That's a great example. I've seen that quite a bit. Okay, The last examples I have here are the emails being used too often. I see this quite a bit in procurement when you've got purchase orders that you're sending to vendors, sending them purchase orders and saying, hey, this is what we would like to order. You email your vendor, you attach maybe an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF that says that. Subsequently getting approval for that purchase order from a manager, maybe if it's over a certain dollar amount, you have to send an email to your manager to say, hey, I put in this PO, it's over $10,000, I need your approval. That's something that doesn't need to be handled in email. Emails have a tendency to get lost if someone receives too many, if they're out of the office, it can't get forwarded. Those normal email problems. And so having that process in an ERP system in a more standardized way would really save time and also reduce the risk of something important being missed and sitting. The other place where I see emails being used too often is accounts payable. The AP check run is a standard check run. This is how you would pay your vendors for either products or services that they've provided for you. If you're using email to communicate with your manager for check approval, or you're using it to communicate with your vendor to indicate that you've paid them, then something is wrong. Email can be used as a backup or as a way to reiterate a communication that's already been sent to them, but there's really no need for it to be um, done exclusively in email. That has all the same risks that using email comes with. The last one I have listed here is the database non-standard business processes. And the examples where I've seen this happen are, again, in manufacturing, that combination of tribal knowledge and a custom integration that was created to generate a work order released to production, for example. There's a whole myriad of problems that are associated with that, but most most importantly, if someone is out or if it breaks and the person who wrote the integration is on vacation for 2 weeks, let's say it's Christmas coming up and they're gone, then you don't have a way to prioritize your work orders, and that can even risk production being halted until that gets resolved. So huge amount of risk, definitely doesn't need to be the case. There are tools in place to remedy that. Warehousing, ship consolidation. This is a big one. Determining how best to combine shipments when they're traveling to the same location. So if you've got a customer who's located maybe in Colorado and they've got 5 different orders shipping to the same place, all via the same ship method, so maybe FedEx Ground, it would make sense that you ship all of those together, right? That customer probably doesn't want to receive 5 separate boxes to the same location, because then they're going to get charged more for it. So identifying when shipments can be consolidated in a warehouse is where you would for sure want a standard process. You wouldn't want a custom integration or a custom, program to determine your recommendation for shipping, because I've seen that be quite unstable. And the last one I have here is inventory, specifically movement journals. When you're moving things from one location to another, whether it's within one warehouse or across warehouses, there's much better ways to automate this than simply manually saying, I've removed 10 from inventory and I've inserted 10 from inventory. That may still be a requirement, and the ability to do that doesn't need to go away. But if it's part of a standard process that you're doing daily or even weekly, that's really a great place for automation, or even just change, an upgrade, a small upgrade. Okay, so just a few closing comments from me here. One of the things I'd really like to just point out is that not everything needs to be changed. Moving to a new ERP system it's a big process. Identifying which of your business processes need to be changed or would benefit the most from being changed can save both time and money. But people tend to get excited about the bells and whistles of a new system, and sometimes that can make a process overcomplicated. And sometimes the simplest adjustment to someone's day-to-day really can make the biggest improvement for them. And there's also value in learning a new system, and sometimes doing something manually, even initially, will help you learn what the system is trying to do, and that can actually put you in a much better position for um, automating it in the future. So if you've been doing something manually, even after you've migrated to Dynamics F&O, and you decide, okay, yeah, I've been doing the same thing. I do it every day. I click here, I click here, I click here. You understand that really well after you've been doing it for a while. And so then you'd be able to have, sort of a post-mortem evaluation of your process and say, okay, I think this could be automated, or let's look at ways of simplifying this process. So small changes can result in big improvements, and sometimes the simpler the better. Um, a couple quick examples of what I mean by that is Dynamics provides a really great Excel add-in tool to automate manual entry. So what that means is you can use Excel essentially as a direct link into Dynamics. And so you can use whatever tools you already used in Excel, but you can actually update records in Dynamics using Excel. And so that's a way you can kind of maintain the process you maybe already had in Excel, but incorporate it in such a way that you don't then also have to repeat all those steps in the new system. So it's a really small tool, really great tool, easy to learn how to use, and can provide a really big improvement in someone's process. And the other one I just wanted to point out, another great example, is automatic notifications to anyone in your organization. So if I'm submitting checks, or I'm submitting a purchase order, or anything like that, you can automate notifications to the people who need to know that you're doing those things. So this saves time entering email, this saves time maybe calling them. If that person is out of the office, you can, using the organizational chart in the system, it will know who to forward it to after that. There's all kinds of things that really save time and make sure that someone's always getting those important notifications. Okay, that's what I have. Thank you so much for being part of my session. I hope it was helpful, and I will hand it back off to Melissa.
So thank you once again for attending this session, and thank you to our presenter. Kaylee's contact information is on the slide, so please feel free to reach out to her or your account manager if you have any questions from today's session. Have a great rest of your day.